as disputed by farmers that include Jeremy Clarkson, who says ministers must admit they've got this wrong and back down.
A message for the Prime Minister if he's watching today from Rio.
He isn't, he's in Rio.
If he's watching...
He's watching, he's going la 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 la, sit with adenoids, la 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 with his Playmobil hair. Don't like him.
Coming up, we'll look at the numbers behind the speeches and we'll speak to those who say the plans are a hammer blow to farmers. Also ahead tonight, an elderly man arrested over a murder 57 years ago. Louisa Dunn was found dead in Bristol in 1967. A 92-year-old man is now in police custody. We'll have the details for you. Plus, we'll find out why a new therapy for Tourette syndrome, tested out here by Lewis Capaldi, could be a game changer for the 300,000 people who have Tourette's in the UK. And it was a snow day for hundreds of schools in Wales and the Midlands today, with widespread travel disruption in affected areas and forecasters saying there is more on the way. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. Please back down. That was a message from Jeremy Clarkson to the government today, as more than 10,000 people gathered in Whitehall to protest against the planned inheritance tax change on farms. Under the plans, farms worth £1 million or more would be subject to inheritance tax of 20%. Farmers say it will deal a hammer blow to the countryside. The government is adamant that the vast majority of farms won't be affected. Coming up, we'll take a look at the numbers. We'll hear from farmers and a tax expert who says the changes would actually help farming communities. And we will hear from Jeremy Clarkson. But first, Sky correspondent Dan Whitehead has this report from Westminster.
They came from all corners of the country. More than 10,000 farmers brought Whitehall to a standstill, hoping their message to overturn the new inheritance tax rule is heard loud and clear.
How do you feel about the government and this plan? Because Labour promised not to do this in the next election.
Did.
How do you feel?
It's disappointing. It's sad. We want to pay taxes. We're OK with that, but to impact us so greatly, and it's disappointing.
It just feels like a kick in the teeth.
You know, our job and our way of life is to feed people and to look after the environment. It's something we've been doing for years. So, that's all we want to do. We don't want to empty the shelves, but if it comes to it, then that's what's going to happen.
Jeremy, what's your word to the government? Your life on stage. Please back down.
He has become the celebrity voice for the sector. TV presenter come farmer Jeremy Clarkson, insisting the government needs to perform a U-turn.
For the sake of everybody here, and for all the farmers who are stuck at home today, paralysed by a fog of despair over what's been foisted upon them, I beg of the government to be big, to accept that this was rushed through, it wasn't thought out, and it's a mistake. That's the big thing to do, admit it, and back down.
Little chance of that happening. The government doubling down on its numbers, insisting there'll be no change in policy.
Assuming these projections from HMRC validated by the OBR and the IFS are correct, then many of them probably happily are wrong, because there are things that they can do to plan their tax affairs, as most businesses or asset owners would do, to limit their liability. I mean, the numbers I've heard bandied around are enormous and very, 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 very frightening.
This is the biggest protest that farmers have held in years, and they say that if the government doesn't back down over this, they will be back, and it may not be as peaceful.
Farming strikes and further protests may be on the cards. They insist the next generation may not be able to take over for real if this budget proposal goes through. As they head back to the countryside, there's little sign of a clear road ahead. Dan Whitehead, Sky News in Westminster.
Well, a recurring theme of this argument over the past week or so is that the government has its sums wrong, and far more farms will be affected by the inheritance tax change than it is claiming. So what's the truth? Here's our business correspondent, Paul Kelsey.
Nobody likes inheritance tax, but until now, farmers haven't had to worry about it. That's because they've enjoyed 100% tax relief under two categories. Agricultural property relief, covering land and farm buildings, and business property relief. That covers crops, livestock, machinery, farm shops and the like. The problem, if you're the Treasury, is 100% relief attracts people who want to shelter their wealth, and that's affected who's buying farms. This chart shows us what category of people are buying farms. Look at the first 3 quarters of this year. Just 30% here was bought by actual farmers. The rest is going to lifestyle farmers, think Jeremy Clarkson, private investors and institutional investors. Now, the government says sheltering wealth this way is unfair and unsustainable, so they're changing the rules. Instead of 100% relief, it will be limited. Now, every individual farmer will have £1 million of inheritance tax relief. That rises to £1.5 million once you add the normal personal reliefs that everybody gets. Could be £3 million if there's a couple passing on a farm. But above that, wherever you are on that scale, you will face a bill. How many farmers will be affected is the key question. The government likes these numbers. Agricultural property relief, we're interested in the estates that are worth more than £1 million, so could be above those thresholds. Just 462, says the Prime Minister. That's not too bad, doesn't sound too bad. It doesn't include the business reliefs, and the National Farmers Union say the problem for them is much, much bigger. And they like these numbers from DEFRA, the Department of the Environment. These are farms, proportion by value, 10% worth less than £250,000. But just look at this. The government's own numbers, 49% of farms worth more than £1.5 million. That means they could be facing a tax bill. How do they pay for it? Farms are asset rich, but they're cash poor. This shows us just how cash poor. Average profits for croppable farms, arable and horticulture, look in the last financial year, they've halved and they're less than £50,000. Even with 10 years to pay off an inheritance tax bill of, say, £1 million, that's £100,000 a year. Your profit doesn't even get halfway. So perhaps the real question here is not, is inheritance tax fair for farmers? It's how do we make farming pay?
Paul Kelso going through the disputed figures there, and you saw Jeremy Clarkson in Dan Whitehead's report at the start of the programme. Well, I was also at today's protests in Whitehall, and I spoke to the TV presenter, as well as to the organiser of today's rally, and some of those who say that their family farms are facing ruin.
Back down.
Keep moving, please,
Back
guys,
down.
keep moving.
You know, if you make a mistake, we all do, and they have, be big enough to say, we made a mistake here, and then back down.
What happens if they don't?
I don't know. British aren't very good at protesting.
Keep moving, please, guys.
What do you want to say to the farmers here today?
Well, good luck. You know, I'm trying to support you as best I can.
Do you agree with the government trying to close the tax loophole, though, for wealthy people buying up land, pricing farmers out?
No, that's not the argument. That's not the argument.
Do you think the government are listening,
It's
Jeremy?
not that they're pricing farmers out. That's not the argument.
Do you think the government are listening?
No, he's in Rio. You'd have to have big ears to hear us from there.
Do you think this will change the government's mind?
I don't know. Hope so.
On this side, go in this side.
I'm going to get in this.
Yeah. Jeremy, what could you do best to help farmers? I know you've turned up here today. We continue this fight with them because you are part of the farming community now.
No, no,
and they look to you.
I'm just a journalist who has a farm and is able to report through the vehicle of Clarkson's farm what it's like to be a farmer.
And just how hard is that?
You've no idea. Have you seen Clarkson's farm?
I have,
It's
yes.
that hard.
And I spoke to a gentleman who lost his father, and he thinks it's because of this kind of pressure. And you've spoken
I wouldn't be
about the
surprised. The
mental health
suicide rate in farming is off the charts. Because there's just very little support. And do forgive me, I've got to go.
Just a final message for the Prime Minister, if he's watching today from Rio.
He isn't. He's in Rio.
If he's watching...
He's watching. He's going la 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 la. Sit with adenoids. La 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 with his Playmobil hair. Don't like him.
There's a significant part of me that sympathises with their idea in principle. We don't live and work in principles. We live and work with facts and reality and the day-to-day of what we do. And the reality of what they're proposing is that pretty average family businesses like mine and like I've just stood on that stage. There are thousands of people here. This is not 500 a year. This is thousands of people.
Buses are still arriving as we speak.
I've had calls from people that have been held up on the train by snow, but I'm battling to get here. People have shown in their droves what this means to them. If Mum and Dad leave the farm to me now, they've to live for 7 years, and that might happen. Should I start leaving it to William? He's 8. is 18 months old. Where do you draw the line here? Our industry kills more people each year than another. Next week I might not be here. And if I die, he has £1 million tax bill. That's his home gone. A business that 3 generations of us have worked for. My grandparents moved to our farm after the Second World War when the government wanted farmers.
I'm probably luckier than some. We don't have very, very elderly people on the family, so my parents are in their 60s, but for farmers who've got family members in their 80s or 90s, they might get caught out and they will feel hurt because they might not be able to hand their farms over and have the 7-year plan, which is the same for the rest of everybody, and they may lose their farms inadvertently when their whole lives they've been sort of advised to, to keep as a working farmer for tax reasons.
It's a huge stress from both for Charlie, my oldest son Alex, who's in the farm business. He's very worried about the future. He's speaking here today. We're a close family. There are other closely. We've come up as a group from Buckinghamshire with 4 or 5 local family farms represented. Everybody is being affected, whether they have 50 acres or it's intensely farmed, or whether it's arable and it's a very large farm. The margins for profit are so small compared with the total investment, that the numbers just don't bear. It doesn't add up, and it's very difficult for the farmer to then sort of say, well, to be asked to pay all this huge amount of inheritance tax that is just not sitting there in cash. It's all tied up in land.
My great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father, and now I farm on our farm, where we farmed since 1910, and I was hoping to be able to pass that on to my children intact. We have worked hard to make sure we can keep farming. We've increased cow numbers to make sure that we're as efficient as we can be. I've diversified so that we can get an income for 2 families. And if we have to pay 20% of the value of our assets upon death, I can't do it. I can't sell 20% of my land and still have enough food to feed my cows. I can't sell 20% of my cows and still make money to make the business work. This tax has been set at a level that's too low. £1 million is about 100 acres. 100 acres is not a viable size for a farm, which means that the government is in effect saying we're not in support of farming.
If they made it 15 million, because 15 million sounds a lot of money, but then when you're talking in farming terms, that might pay for 2 or 3 people working on a farm, because it's all about buying the land, buying the kit. It costs lots and lots of money, which a lot of people have no idea, no clue about how much it costs. You can't live off 300 acres, but otherwise you've got to have another job. And that's what a lot of people don't realise.
But it doesn't just end there either. It's not just actually the buildings, it's the animals on that building, it's the machinery, it's the feed, it's the crops in the ground and everything else. It's just, if you think of a house in London, a house on its own with no land or no business with it, you wouldn't find one for £1 million.
Why don't the government understand this? Do you feel they're out of touch with the rural community?
They have no understanding. They want to kill us like they killed the miners. It's just an industry they're not interested in.
And I just want to say, don't complain about farmers with your mouth full.
What do you mean by that?
Well, everybody's eating and enjoying themselves. You don't realise where the food comes from, what source, where it comes from.
Oh, thank you to all the farmers who spoke to us today in Whitehall. Well, as Jeremy Clarkson said when I spoke to him, Sir Keir Starmer is in Rio for the G20, but this issue has followed him to Brazil, where he has again insisted that the vast majority of farms will not be affected. In the past hour, my colleague Sophie Ridge put Jeremy Clarkson's comments about the government to the Environment Minister, Steve Reed.
Back down.
Just keep moving, please,
Back
guys,
down.
keep moving.
If you make a mistake, we all do, and they have, be big enough to say, we made a mistake here, and then back down.
Are you going to back down?
Well, I love Jeremy Clarkson's show, but I think he's listening to the wrong data here. If the vast majority of farmers are not affected, only 500 according to this data, and that's based on the last year for which we had actual hard data claims.
So let's get into this issue then, shall we? I'm joined in the studio by 23-year-old farmer Jacob Walker and President of the Country Land and Business Association, Victoria Vivian. And joining us from Cambridgeshire tonight, Professor of Accounting Practice at Sheffield University, Richard Murphy. Thank you to all of you for coming in. to speak about this issue that you all feel so passionately about. Jacob, I'm going to come to you first. As a young farmer with a young family, Steve Reed there saying you've got your sums wrong, you shouldn't be concerned.
I think that anyone that's got over 100 acres in the right area of England should be concerned, because £1 million simply isn't a lot of money when it comes to 100 acres of land. So to say that the vast majority have got it extremely wrong is quite insulting, and it just simply isn't true.
When the government talk about their figures, they say, look, there are going to be lots of caveats in the inheritance tax for farmers. It's going to be at 20%, which is half the standard rate. The first 1 million will be tax-free, as will up to 500,000 for everyone who is qualified for. That takes it to 1.5 million. That will double to 3 million if the estate is left by two farmers who are married or in a civil partnership. The government says only a quarter of estates will be potentially exposed, and just a few hundred each year will be affected when the owner dies. So this rule will be in place, but if you play it right, you might not be affected. Is that right, that you have to figure it out?
I don't think it is right, because we're under enough strain, enough stress as it already is. So to put that burden again on the farmer rather than the government re-looking at their figures and maybe increasing it or not applying it to the over 90, which they've point-blank denied anyway, would be a lot better than rather than putting it all on the farmers again.
Yeah. It's a really emotional issue because, you know, we are talking about business, but we are talking about families, family businesses. But at the heart of this is facts and figures and a discrepancy, Victoria, between what the government think are the correct figures as to how many will be affected and what the farming community think are the numbers that will be affected. Why is there such a big discrepancy?
Well, there are two discrepancies. One of the ones which you're not hearing very much from the government at the moment is that the Department for Farming, DEFRA, also has different figures to the Treasury's figures. So they can't even agree amongst themselves what the real figures are. They are saying, basing all of their figures on 1 year of tax return, which is the year before last, I think. Yep. And we're looking at, it's very inconvenient, but you can't predict that we're all going to die in the right place at the right time. And so we're looking at our figures over, probably over a generation, a short generation. And the impact could be enormous. Just because it's a slow crash doesn't mean it's not a fatal one.
Well, talking about facts and figures, it only feels right to bring in Richard at this point, Professor of Accounting Practice at Sheffield University Management School. Richard, you were shaking your head there to what Victoria had to say. There are an estimated 13,000 farmers in Whitehall today and their supporters. Are they right to be so concerned?
Well, I think I'm afraid to say they really are deeply misinformed. The first thing is that, in fact, we're talking about £3 million of relief are being available to farmers, and that's not even true, because the true figure is £5 million, because farmers are also able to claim business property relief as well as agricultural property relief. So the figures that we were hearing earlier on from somebody who was saying, well, let's include the cattle, let's include the crops, let's include the feed, let's include the equipment, all that is subject to another million for each person on top of that. And by the way, your organisation says that on their website, Victoria. So let's not beat around the bush here.
It's included.
You agree with that?
The BPR is included. It's not a separate allowance. It's included in the same allowance.
No, it isn't. It's an additional allowance, and you say so on your own website. So
and of course,
I've checked with the revenue manual. Now let's move on from that, because they are separate reliefs. One is on agricultural property, one is on business property. But the figures are reliable, and the figures are not from 1 year. The figures have come over a long period of time. But let's just stand back a minute and let's just talk about the reality of this, shall we? And let's just do some simple economics. The fact is that over the last 20 years, the price of agricultural land has skyrocketed. And I've known the price of agricultural land for nearly 50 years because I've been an East Anglian for a very long time and first prepared farm accounts when I was quite young in the 1970s, when land was going for next to nothing. And now it's going for over £10,000 an acre here. In Northern Ireland, it's £16,000 an acre, but admittedly, farms there are much smaller. The fact of the matter is, however, that we have not got data to prove that more than 400 or 500 farms a year are claiming agricultural property relief. And this has been going back over several years, and the people who are buying farms
Richard,
now
can I just
are
interrupt
the
there,
likes of
because-
Jeremy Clarkson.
Yeah,
so we
Richard-
are actually simply subsidising farms. Can I just make the obvious point? Nobody has to be a farmer. Nobody asks anyone to be a farmer. And anybody who's a farmer who doesn't like this can sell up and make over £100,000 a
All right,
year.
I'm going to put that to Jacob. I'm going to put that to
Jacob.
Jacob. Jacob, you don't have to be a farmer. You can do something else.
Perfectly acceptable that every farmer could go and do something else, but then who's going to feed the nation? It's as simple as that.
Who's going to feed the nation, Richard?
Nobody's going to get into a business to earn nothing.
No, this is another nonsense argument, because in fact what we're finding is that agricultural land is worth a lot of money because people are buying it, and when they buy it to claim agricultural property relief for inheritance tax purposes, they have to farm it. Nobody has ever bought a farm and left it to sit aside, unless of course they are claiming set aside and rewilding.
Could I leave?
You can. Let's let Victoria come in this. Yeah, because you are making a lot of points. Let's let her respond to something. Victoria,
I think so. I mean, I'm kind of dying of boredom there a bit, Richard, because the fact is that you once did a few farm accounts 35 years ago. You don't do what Richard does. You don't get up every morning, put on your wellies with your waterproofs attached to that. Oh, sorry, Jacob. And you're very happy to opine on a kind of a theory of farming and a theory of agricultural economics, which is your view, and judging by your age, probably the same as mine, it's a clear kind of Marxist view of economics. Let's smash it to pieces.
I'm not a Marxist. Let's stop the
once you've
stupidity
smashed
here,
it to
shall we?
pieces, I think his farm is not worth smashing just so that you can try and prove your theory. That is not the way to cope with the problems. Actually, I've read your article with great interest, and I too think that there are deep-seated problems within agriculture. But killing off farming from the top down is not the answer. And so everybody protesting today was right to be there. And on their behalf, I would like to say that we resent the condescending tones that are coming from government about Jacob and me and all of the people like us just not really understanding the figures.
Richard, can I ask you, is this the right way for the government to go about things? Because everyone will know tax is confusing to the mere mortal. You are an expert. That's why people come to accountants to help them sort it out. This is a confusing picture for farmers, which is why they have come to Whitehall. You can forgive them perhaps for feeling stressed and anxious, because on one hand, they are facing this inheritance tax change. On the other, the government is saying, with a bit of planning, it doesn't have to be this way. Plan ahead. Use all the relief schemes, all the different mechanisms available to you, and you can avoid this. Can you understand why farmers are feeling anxious and confused? It doesn't have to be this way. The government could have done this another way, could they not have? If they want to close a tax hole, and as you said, you know, the wealthy people buying up the land and pricing out farmers, generations of farmers.
Let me be clear, young farmers should be delighted about this change in inheritance tax because it is going to push down the price of agricultural land considerably. Therefore, there will be a lot of new entrants into farming, which will considerably expand the stock of farmers in this country, which will improve our agricultural supply enormously. This is liberating for farming, which is at the moment constrained by being in too few hands, particularly the hands of the very wealthy.
OK,
so this is
I'm going to put
farming.
that to Jacob. I'm going to put that to Jacob because I want Jacob to respond to this. Jacob, Richard is saying that this measure by the government, this inheritance tax change, is actually helping you. It's going to make it less attractive as an investment for wealthy people to avoid tax. Farmland will decrease in value. There would be more of it available and farmers could expand. New farmers could enter the business. This is good for you.
Yeah, well, it's very good for someone in an office to say that. But when you've got young people that are in farming that are making at most 20 grand a year, at the very most, how, even if land prices came down to £1,000 an acre, how are they going to expand when not only over 10 years when their father or grandfather dies, they've got to pay this inheritance tax bill, but how are they supposed to then buy more land? It doesn't correlate.
Richard, can you explain that for us, perhaps?
But look, I dealt with this on the blog post and the videos that I've made today, which have been viewed by a lot of people. And what I explained was that the problem that you're then explaining, which is entirely reasonable, that farmers aren't making enough money, has to be addressed in a different way. We need price support for farmers. We need to take control of the food industry, which is destructive in this country of health and of farmers, and we know that, and put in place proper food strategy to make sure that farmers are paid for producing decent food that doesn't kill people by the time it gets to shops because it's become ultra-processed. So the reality is I'm all in favour of support for farmers, but don't, for God's sake, ask for people to believe that you're hard up when you're sitting on millions of pounds worth of assets. You're not going to win the public by doing that, because you could simply sell up and sit on a fortune for the rest of your life if that's your situation, and the rest of the country.
But Richard, they want to farm. Hang on, I'm going to stop you there. Jacob, you don't want to give up your business. Sell your business and do what? You want to farm.
That's exactly it. And what's his plan when every young farmer in this country sells up? Is he going to import it from Australia, New Zealand? Where does that solve the issue of producing food for a whole nation?
They simply won't all sell up. There's no evidence for this claim.
But they would have to.
Why are you all going to sell up? If we had a proper farming strategy that supported your income so you could afford to actually live properly on your farm, then you wouldn't have to sell up. And that's what I'm arguing for. Why don't you listen to this? I'm no Marxist, as I've just been abused of being. I'm actually wanting to support you in your businesses by reducing the cost of one of your major inputs, which is land. Yes, it will reduce the value of your estate for inheritance tax purposes, so you won't even have to pay inheritance tax, but you will also be able to buy more land to actually get people into farming, and you will increase your incomes if you follow what I say, and therefore it will become a profitable activity which will encourage people to go into it. So we will have a future land and farming supply for this country. Please see the big picture here. You're picking up the wrong end of the stick, and you're making an argument you should never be pursuing because it's totally bad for farming to go this way.
Victoria, Victoria, I'm going to bring you in on that. Richard talks about farming strategy there, and Jeremy Clarkson raised it. He said farmers need better support. Regardless of this inheritance tax issue, that was an issue before this came in. Farmers were crying out for help, for a better way. Richard, I know, is in favour of modernising farming. But there has to be a better way of doing this, doesn't there? Why haven't the government come up with a tax policy that goes after those that are specifically targeting farmland for tax avoidance? Surely there's a simpler way of doing this without having British farmers marching on Downing Street. What would you want to do, the government? Well, what would you want the government to do that would help you better?
I think there are some short-term things that the government really needs to go. Jacob was raising there's a real fear in the farming community about their older family who are in their 80s and possibly 90s. You know, the government should be looking at a way of releasing them from the 7-year rule. So if they want to dispose or hand over their land, they can do it without the fear that they might not last 7 years. That would be a very easy thing to do. But I think the government should come back to this and actually create a strategy. This was two things that happened separately. On the one hand, DEFRA took away the BPS payments down to the last 7,200 for next year. Meanwhile, in another place, there was an attack on agricultural property relief. There doesn't seem to have been any attempt to see that the farming community feel as if they're in this terrible pincer movement. Now, the ELM scheme, which you're talking about, the great thing about the ELM scheme is we're no longer vassals of the state, which I think is this picture of support that Richard was espousing. We will deliver by contract public goods for the people of this country, and we will get paid for doing that. No longer a subsidy for the square acreage that you have of land, but a payment for doing something that everybody needs. And that is a good policy. It's making ground, it's making payments. It's really badly stalled since June because of hiatus in government and so on. What the Secretary of State needs to do with the Farming Minister is go back to the Rural Payments Agency, go back to DEFRA, put their foot down on, as in get going, on the ELMS project, and actually create the farming industry that we want. We want a successful, energetic, dynamic 21st century farming industry.
Well, Richard was agreeing with you on that final point you made there, which you may be pleased to hear there. I'm glad we reached some common ground in this, because it really is good to thrash this out and get all sides of the debate, because it has got so confused. And Jacob, taking this inheritance tax issue off the table for the moment, I know it is the most pressing concern today, and it's what everyone's talking about. But you were under pressure before this announcement was made in the budget. And I just want to get a sense of how you feel about the future of farming right now. Because, you know, I was with you and your young son, just 6 months old, in the green room before we came into the studio. And I'm sure you want him to have a future in farming if he wishes to do so.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about the future for your family and the business?
I think he's very vulnerable at the times. You know, it's not just the inheritance tax that they've decided to do. They've decided to add a fertiliser tax. Like Victoria said, they've changed the de-linked payments for BPS. It's not just they're not just going after the wealthy landowners. It's quite simple. Otherwise, they wouldn't have added all these other taxes to farmers. And there is just no support. I don't think they understand what goes on a farm. It's easy for someone to sit in an office with some figures and say it's not going to affect the vast majority, but a fertiliser tax affects every farmer in the United Kingdom. So it's just nonsense to sit there and say that it's not going to affect every farmer, because it does.
OK. Well, listen, Jacob Walker, Victoria, Vivian and Richard Murphy, thank you very much for talking about this issue. That's a real emotional one and a very complicated one as well. We'll continue to follow the progress of this. And as Jeremy Clarkson said, you know, he wants the government to back down. Who knows what will happen? But at the moment, Sir Keir Starmer, very confident in his position. We'll continue to follow this. Thank you for your contribution tonight. Really appreciate it. Really important. Now, let's talk about a major breakthrough after the break. This is regarding a cold case murder from almost 60 years ago. We'll bring you the details of that. Also coming up, new CCTV released as an international manhunt continues for the husband of Harshita Brella, who was found dead last week. And we'll talk about the new digital technologies that could reduce the severity of symptoms for people with tics and Tourette's.
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent.
You are not getting in this elevator, okay?
The judge made it very clear that she could see no justifiable reason why Sakulas wasn't here facing British justice.
I promised I would get him justice.
Free, wherever you get your news. This is what they're up against. The wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? This is the exact spot in Nottingham where their 19-year-old son, Barnaby Webber, lost his life.
I just think it's so cruel and so harsh.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
Sky News gets the full story first. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. It's legal to let go. Set the speed and take the hands off. It's almost driverless, but not quite. Hans is a highly trained police dog. The force is incredible. It's really frightening, actually. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. A 92-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of rape and murder over the death of a woman 57 years ago. Louisa Dunn was found dead at her home in Bristol in 1967. She was 75. Well, our correspondent Ashna Hurlang is here with more details. Tell us what we know.
Well, it's an extraordinary development, this, for a cold case that hasn't been solved for nearly 6 decades. And as you say, Louisa Dunn was found by her neighbour in the eastern area of Bristol in 1967. She was found to have been strangled and then raped. And for 57 years, Avon and Somerset Police haven't been able to find who did it. Up until now, this had been the oldest cold case on their books. But now with the help of Suffolk police, they've actually managed to make an arrest. They have arrested a 92-year-old man from the Ipswich area who's been arrested on suspicion of murder and rape. His arrest follows a forensic review that they undertook with this case last year. And the man who is now in custody and being questioned would have been in his mid-30s when Miss Dunn died. Her next of kin have been informed, and alongside this statement and alongside this development, police have also released this image of her, which is an extraordinary picture for someone that, as we say, have been talking about, was 75 years old. The detective inspector investigating this case, he hopes this investigation could bring Ms Dunn's relatives answers they've waited a lifetime for.
OK. Ashna, thank you. Ashna Heranaga with details of that remarkable development in a cold case. Thank you so much. Now, police say a woman who was found dead in the boot of a car in East London last week died from strangulation. Harshita Barela was 24. An international manhunt is now underway to find her husband, who police believe has fled the country. Meanwhile, Sky News has spoken to Harshita's family in India. Here's Neville Lazarus.
It's like there is something missing from my body, from within me now. I don't understand when it will be normal life ever and how I can't forget her ever for as long as I live. I used to think she's my responsibility. She was my younger sister, but I didn't get the chance.
A family in shock and grief, grappling to come to terms with the brutal murder of 24-year-old Harshita. She was married to Pankaj and had left for Britain early this year. Her body was found inside the boot of a vehicle tens of miles away from her home. The post-mortem established she had been murdered by strangulation. The police have launched an international manhunt for her husband, suspected for the murder, who they believe may have fled the country. The family says Harshita was a victim of domestic abuse and had been under the protection of a court order. That fatal night, neighbours heard arguments and furniture being banged, after which Harshita was uncontactable. This rose suspicions of a family in Delhi.
I just want to please update, please update us time to time what is happening there and what has happened with Harshita. Please, and my first request to you, UK government, please send my baby, send my sister to me. Please, according to our rituals, we did something. I just want to rest in peace her soul. Please, please give my sister, please.
I want my daughter back as soon as possible, in whatever condition. I want to see my daughter soon, and she should get justice.
Neighbours and friends gather to pay condolences and share pain and grief with the family. They want justice, but for now, they want Harshita back for the last rites.
I want God to send her back in any form, but send her to us.
And the wait is agonizing. Neville Lazarus, Sky News, Delhi.
Still to come on the UK tonight, the health watchdog gives the green light to the first digital therapies for tics and Tourette syndrome. I'll find out how it might help users after the break. And an Arctic blast hits the UK with snow alerts and weather warnings for large parts of the country.
Hedgehog, biscuit, cats, sausage.
Now, the health watchdog has given the green light to the first digital therapies for tics and Tourette syndrome. It's thought more than 300,000 children and adults in the UK have Tourette's, but only 20% of children and young people with tic disorders currently have access to therapies. Well, Jess Tom, co-founder of Tourette's Hero, is here in the studio with me. Jess has Tourette syndrome, so we should warn you there is a small chance of Jess using some offensive language during our conversation. But everyone at home will understand that because of the subject matter this evening. Thank you so much for coming in to see us, Jess. Now, talk to me about these new developments. They've been described as really exciting. On a practical level, how are they going to help people who have Tourette's and tics?
Well, currently, the diagnosis process for tics and Tourette's, whether that's for children or for adults, is slow. It can take months, if not years, and access to support is really patchy. Up and down the country, it works in different ways, and so lots of people don't have access to information and support strategies and techniques that might help them in their everyday lives. So hopefully these new approaches will improve access to support and connect people with knowledge and information and practical ideas more quickly. Hedgehog,
how much research goes into the development and study of Tourette's syndrome?
Hedgehog, not enough, if you ask me. It is a complicated condition and it affects people in very different ways, and it also, there's a sort of spectrum of how it impacts people. And techniques and approaches and having different tools is really important because there's no one-size-fits-all approach. With Tourette's, the one thing that is predictable is that it's an unpredictable condition that fluctuates, and goes up and down in the course of someone's life. So if we can develop techniques and approaches and have a toolkit of support, then people with Tourette's have a much better chance of living happy, full and creative, productive lives. But approaches that manage tics are only ever part of the story. We need access to good educational support, good support in work, social care, access to other types of healthcare like occupational therapy, and physiotherapy, because then you can respond to different tics and different requirements. But anything that adds stuff into our toolkits feels really exciting and really
becomes part of the bigger picture, doesn't it? So some of these new developments are new therapies. We've seen Lewis Capaldi trying a bit of kit out. Do you know much about that? What can you tell us about what that is?
Well, there is a new device. It's a wrist-worn device that's at a very early stage. I think it's important to manage expectations. None of these things are a sort of immediate answer or a quick solution or a cure, but they are tools that people might be able to use to manage the impact of tics in different ways. And Lewis and his openness in describing his experiences with Tourette's is really powerful. I'm an artist with Tourette's, and the one thing I suppose that I would want people to know is that while reducing your tics or learning to manage your tics is important and useful and can improve your life, the thing that makes the biggest difference, is the right support, practical help, and the understanding within our families and communities, because those are the things that day to day make a huge impact and that people could start doing immediately.
Yeah, understanding and education is the key to so many things, isn't it? And when you want to talk to people about Tourette's, because I'm sure lots of people ask you questions.
Alan Hansen's tits. Well, entirely relevant.
We apologise for that, but it's not entirely unexpected. What do you want people to know about Tourette's? Because, as I said, you talk about the understanding and education surrounding it in making those living with the condition have a full-rounded experience, live life to the full. What do you want people to know?
Well, for children and young people with Tourette's, whether they have got a diagnosis or a waiting diagnosis, I'd want them to know that you can live a happy, full and active life with quite significant tics. And I would want them to feel proud and confident in who they are, exactly as they are, for everybody else within our communities. And I would want people to be able to recognise Tourette's, to be able to offer support and understanding, but also to know that it is a complex condition and lots of the most difficult and impactful ways that it can affect people aren't brilliantly well understood. And so there is a lot more to Tourette's often than meets the eye.
Just sausage, biscuit, how old were you when you were diagnosed, and what was that like? Because you radiate positivity.
Hedgehog, biscuit,
but I would imagine that hasn't always been the case. Talk me through what it's like to be diagnosed.
It absolutely hasn't always been the case, and there was a long time where I found it difficult to talk about tics and Tourette's without tears, and I found it really upsetting. But I had a conversation with my colleague Matthew where he talked about Tourette's as a language generating machine, and that not doing something creative with it would be wasteful.
I like the sound of Matthew.
And that was the start of Tourette Zero, the organisation that we run together, and we create art and deliver programmes for other disabled people. And so for me, developing the confidence and language to explain my condition and explain my tics, and knowing how to ask for help when I needed it, have been the most powerful interventions. When I was younger, when I had my earliest tics that we can date were when I was about sort of 6 or 7, but I didn't get a diagnosis of Tourette's until adulthood. And there was a long time where I had internalised the idea that my tics were somehow, or the way that I moved and made noise and my behaviours were somehow bad or dangerous, or that they were shameful. And Biscuit, I would really like children and young people getting diagnosed with tic disorders now, not to have to take any of that shame on board, Biscuit, and to having quick access to support and community feels really powerful. And I think when there's so much amazing knowledge held within our communities of people with tics and Tourette's, and combining that with sort of expert knowledge from healthcare professionals feels like it could be amazingly powerful in what it could unlock for neurodivergent people. Biscuit. Hedgehog.
How brilliant to have somebody like Matthew in your corner to sort of inspire you to help others and to forge your own path as an artist and have the confidence in that.
Well, it's how I learnt that what we say to each other matters. How we talk about disability, how we talk about neurodiversity matters.
To be open and ask and be comfortable to ask and discuss it right. Because some people, I would imagine, feel a little bit embarrassed. They don't want to put you in an awkward position by asking or addressing what's going on.
I work with children and young people for...
they ask all the difficult questions.
Well, they ask the curious questions, but importantly, they listen to the answers. Sometimes as we get older, we ask questions to have our own views confirmed. And I think we could definitely learn something about children's approach to disability, where they are interested, curious, and they're interested in making a world where everybody can access it. When my friend's daughter was worrying about the accessibility of playgrounds, she wasn't asking, how can we change a child so that they can go down the slide? She was asking, how can we make a slide so it's accessible to a wheelchair-using child? We can learn from that approach to thinking about our different bodies and minds and who the world is shaped for.
That's definitely the right way round thinking, isn't it? Well, Jess, thank you so much for coming in to talk about the new developments in this area. It's been wonderful to have your positivity in the studio with us this evening. Jess Tom, co-founder of Tourette's Hero. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Biscuit. Hedgehog, cats.
So to come here on the UK tonight, more snow and ice warnings as an Arctic blast hits the country, and as Frank Lampard is set to return to football, just how is England's golden generation handling the transition from players to managers?
To Alan.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional. This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
And now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail.
The people here are praying quietly to themselves.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
now they're trying to finish the job off so that they can move into the square.
Okay, it's okay. Don't worry, it's okay.
They're becoming very sensitive about having the media around.
They have no protective masks or protective equipment at all.
We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Every time they touch them, they spray.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients, made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Perilously close to the vineyards.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake.
Welcome back. The latest weather picture coming up as an Arctic blast sweeps across the country. Many of you have felt it. Teddy did. He's here with a sport. Earlier on today, caught you on Instagram playing tennis in the snow.
I know, having a little knock. Yeah, nothing too extreme, but yeah, it wasn't too bad actually. It wasn't sticking, thankfully. So it wasn't too slippy.
Interesting conditions for tennis. Right, let's talk about Frank Lampard, because he could be being sent to Coventry.
Yep.
Where do we think he is in his management career, because he's still so young? This is his potentially fourth
job. It's twice at Chelsea. Once was an interim boss at Chelsea.
Just how is that group of former players doing in management, that golden generation of England players as they were described?
Well, some of them maybe made the mature choice of going into the media. We know, like Rio Ferdinand does a lot of work in the media. But for those players that went into football management, we've got Frank Lampard, who had the first spell at Chelsea, went pretty successful off the back of doing well with Derby County in the Championship, took to the playoff final, went to Everton. There was a relegation battle there, left Everton, went back on an interim spell to Chelsea around 18 months ago, only won one game in 11 that he was there. It was a bit of chaos at the club there as a mitigating circumstance. You've got his famous midfield teammate as well. How do you get Lampard and Gerrard to play together? Almost put their names together there. Gerrard won the title in Scotland for Rangers, their first in a decade, but then went to Aston Villa. The team struggled, and since he's left there, Unai Emery has got them into the Champions League with initially the same squad, so that's a count against Gerrard. Wayne Rooney was England's record goalscorer, Manchester United's record goalscorer, probably the figurehead of the golden generation, maybe other than David Beckham, who didn't choose to go into football management. And Rooney has had an up and down time, did well at Derby in difficult times in the lower leagues, went to manage DC United in America, went to Birmingham City, didn't work out for him last season in the Championship. Now he's at Plymouth and they're fighting relegation, so it's quite mixed.
What a whistle-stop tour around the country that was. Why do great players sometimes struggle to make a successful transition to management? Because, of course, there is all this talk about, you know, the lack of English managers. You know, we keep having foreign imports, as it were. What is it that makes a transition successful or unsuccessful?
Well, I think it really depends on the individuals. And some great players seem to have made it successfully. Pep Guardiola being the classic case, I suppose. Holding midfielder player for Barcelona, won loads of titles. Maybe not one of the world's best players, but a really classy midfielder, won the European Cup with them, and got on track to be the most successful manager ever, or certainly in that conversation. Zinedine Zidane has won the Champions League as a player and a head coach at Real Madrid. But yeah, there's often a line that perhaps those very most gifted players at the very top of the game, A, play late into their 30s, and B, have a mercurial talent that's really hard to explain to the players that they coach. Glenn Hoddle was one that was talked off with England with that. But that's the situation regarding management. Update next on Wales, and a big night for them as they look for promotion in the Nations League.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Two England internationals. One, in theory, delicious recipe. One fierce cooking challenge to mark the ECB's Taste of Cricket campaign. What could possibly go wrong?
Here in the kitchen, Jamie and Izzy making, Izzy?
Banana pancakes.
Which apparently is your recipe, which seems unfair on Jamie.
Good. Only if it's good.
Given that this is your recipe, I want some tips for him before we start.
There isn't really any measurements.
Good start.
We just kind
this is encouraging.
Go on feel.
So, banana pancakes on the menu, and Izzy taking a loose approach to both methods and measurements.
It's like they say vanilla's like the garlic of baking. Vanilla extract is to baking what garlic is to cooking. If it says 3, put in 6.
When you say they, who is they?
Just people.
People.
Yeah.
Cooking people.
At all levels, cricket and cuisine are intrinsically linked. For the pros, it's all about being well fueled for a long day in the fields.
literally 6, 7, 8 hours of cricket in a day. Need your carbs, need your good nutrition. Otherwise, at the end of the day, you've got to use the food to perform as best as you can.
Away.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Well, much of the UK tonight remains under yellow weather warnings for snow and ice as an Arctic blast sweeps across the country. Yorkshire and parts of northern England hit with the first heavy snowfall of the season. It happened last night and into this morning. In the Stocksbridge area of Sheffield, a double-decker bus crashed into an empty house. No injuries reported, fortunately. Well, it came as the snow and ice caused travel problems across England and Wales. Heavy snow also falling in Derbyshire. At least 20 schools had snow days. Across the country, more than 200 schools forced to close because of the weather. And the experts are saying there is more on the way, so brace yourself for that. That's all from us. We'll be back tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Up next, it's The World with Gillian Joseph. We'll see you tomorrow night at 8.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.